this Unitarian Universalist congregation to learn more about being human. We learn how to listen, how to forgive, how to grow in trust and compassion. You're welcome here today as you are. Welcome to a time of connection. Welcome to this space made sacred by your presence. Today our guest speaker is Reverend Kristina Spaude. She is joining us live on Zoom. Reverend Spode currently serves as a contract minister for the UU Church of Tarpon Springs, Florida. She's a clinically trained chaplain whose ministry pivoted during the pandemic to serving our congregations and wider faith. Reverend Spode is most passionate about making the way for more justice in the world. Welcome, Reverend. Okay. Our service today, we'll begin with our stone ritual. I'll place 3 stones in the bowl, one for a joy this past week, one for a sorrow, and one for your intention for the upcoming week. A joy this past week, a sorrow, and one for your intention for the upcoming week. Hopefully it'll be a good one.
Good morning. Thank you so much.
Shalom.
Our chalice lighting words this morning come from Heather K. Daniels. This is for the freedom of faith. Our prophets died for the freedom of faith. We are here in their spirit. We are here to practice and sustain our living tradition. To light a chalice, claiming for justice the heat and power of fire. In our free faith, we are here seeking freedom from despair, the freedom to be loved as ourselves, and the freedom to grow beyond imagination. We are here gathered in the name of all that we find holy. Let us give thanks for the gift of gathering here. Amen. And our opening words come from Gretchen Haley. This is forged in the fire of our coming together. What's going to happen? Will everything be okay? What can I do? In these days, we find ourselves too often stuck with these questions on repeat. What's going to happen? Will everything be okay? What can I do? We grasp at signs and markers, articles of news and analysis, Facebook memes and forwarded emails, as if the new zodiac capable of forecasting all that life may yet bring our way, as if we could prepare, as if life had ever made any promises of making sense or turning out the way we thought, as if we are not also actors in this still unfolding story. For this hour we gather, to surrender to the mystery, to release ourselves from the needing to know, the yearning to have it all already figured out, and also the burden of believing we either have all the control or none. Here, in our song and silence, our stories and sharing, we make space for a new breath, a new healing, a new possibility to take root that is courage, forged in the fire of our coming together and felt in the spirit that comes alive in this act of faith, that we believe still, a new world is possible, that we are creating it already, here and now. Come, let us worship together.
So,
Our Time for All Ages today was written by Beth Casebolt and adapted by Andrea James and then me. This is Roots and Wings. Our faith is one where for everything we know, we find more questions. Our spiritual growth or faith formation programming is one place where we help each other learn and grow as we search for what is true. This is part of what makes us Unitarian Universalists, the freedom and encouragement to figure out for ourselves what our own answers are to life's big questions, such as, is there a God? And if so, what and where is it? What happens when we die? Who am I? And how can I make a difference? Unitarian Universalism has 7 principles and 6 sources. The principles are concepts that guide us and that we can actively work on in ourselves, our families, and in our world. For example, if we agree that every person is worthwhile, how does that change the way we relate to our classmates, customers, or strangers who get under our skin? How can we help those in the world who aren't treated well? The sources are the places of our faith that suggest that we look for answers to our questions. Remember that Unitarian Universalism doesn't just hand us answers. Instead, each of us needs to look for the answers that feel and sound right to us. You have to choose the answer that speaks to you. Religious educator Beth Casebolt helps us to understand the idea of where to look for answers. She asks us to imagine a very large library, one with well-marked shelves that anyone can reach and comfortable chairs scattered around for people to sit in, and a few rooms off to one side where people can hold quiet discussions. The books of this library are divided into 6 general categories. The first set of shelves is unlike any you'll see in other libraries. These books are filled with memories and feelings. These are our personal experiences, including those moments when we felt a sense of wonder and awe. When I look, I see books filled with my memories and feelings. When you look, you see yours. And this set of shelves is always expanding and growing because every day we make new experiences to add. The second set of shelves is a collection of stories about real people from history and today. They reflect the words and deeds of people who had important things to say about the way we should treat one another. We call them prophetic. Some are famous, like Ralph Waldo Emerson, Sojourner Truth, Gloria Steinem, and Martin Luther King Jr. Others are not. They live quietly and unknown, but they are making a difference. Some of these prophetic people of all ages are in our church, right here in this room and in our communities. The wisdom of the world's religions fills the third set of shelves. Here you can find religious texts like the Quran and the Bhagavad Gita. Writings by the leaders of the world's religions and thoughts about the texts can be found here. They are grouped by religion, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Wicca, and many more. What can we learn from other faiths that might help us to understand our own? The fourth set of shelves has Jewish and Christian texts. It may seem a little odd to have this separate from world traditions, but Unitarian Universalism has a direct connection to these two faiths, making it important to give them a section of their own. Here we find the Hebrew and Christian sections of the Bible, including all the parts that some groups include and others do not. It's full of many, many stories. Our fifth set of shelves is overflowing with books about scientific discoveries and humanist beliefs. Here we find the humanist manifestos, ethical statements, and the discoveries of Galileo, Marie Curie, Albert Einstein, Jane Goodall, and others. There's a boxed DVD set of the TV show Cosmos with both Carl Sagan and with Neil deGrasse Tyson, and an area full of dinosaur skeletons and fossils. The last set of shelves is filled with books that teach us about the earth. We find First Nations teachings along with pagan and other earth-based religions, books that study the natural rhythms in our lives, and texts about the miracle of life. We'd find science books on these shelves too, covering the environment, biology, sexuality education, and other related fields. Off to one side, picture a lush garden and miniature habitats, since observation is one of the best ways to learn about nature. Our sources are like this imaginary library, which in my mind must be enormous and beautiful, with delicious snacks, trees, and a stream running through it. Our sources are where we look for all the answers we seek. Just as we do in our services and in our lives, we all return again and again to these magical shelves. Our words for reflection today come from Frederick Buechner. This is an excerpt from his Beyond Words. They say that whenever the great Protestant theologian Paul Tillich went to the beach, he would pile up a mound of sand and sit on it, gazing out at the ocean with tears running down his cheeks. One wonders what there was about it that moved him so. The beauty and power of it, the inexpressible mystery of it, the futility of all those waves endlessly flowing in and ebbing out again, the sense that it was out of the ocean that life originally came, and that when life finally ends, it is the ocean that will still remain. Who knows? In his theology, Tillich avoided using the word God because it seemed to him too small, denoting only another being among beings. He preferred to speak instead of the ground of being, of God as that which makes being itself possible, as that because of which existence itself exists. His critics complain that he is being too metaphysical. They say they can't imagine praying to anything so abstract and remote. Maybe Tillich himself shared their difficulty. Maybe it was when he looked at the ocean that he caught a glimpse of the one he was praying to. Maybe What made him weep was how vast and overwhelming it was, and yet at the same time as near as the breath of it in his nostrils, as salty as his own tears. My faith journey began somehow, some way, long before I had language, concepts, or any framework to reference. As has become not uncommon for people my age or younger, I was raised unchurched. I mean that in the way that we only went to church on Christmas Eve and sometimes on Easter, sometimes even going to different churches, and in a secular household turned households. None of my parents talk about their own faiths, so much so that I still cannot tell you a thing about their theologies. And so I was left as a child to find my own way. I'm sure I didn't listen when we did go to church. I'm not a good listener in that way. I can listen to individuals and groups when there's conversation, but when listening requires that much of a passive role, one of receiving, my mind wanders easily. That's the primary reason that when I'm in meetings, I am often cross-stitching. My cross-stitching is actually laid before me right now. It helps me keep focused and listen better than I would if my hands aren't occupied. I'm not sure that if I had been a good listener that I would have been swayed in any way. The only things I heard from Christians at school, for example, were the beliefs of people going to hell, an idea that I just couldn't understand. The things we hear from the conservative and evangelical groups, who we may think of as just the loudest of the bunch. I'm sure others had different beliefs, but I didn't hear about them. And I don't know how much I would have cared, in all honesty. As a child, religious beliefs didn't resonate for me. It provided no meaning for me. Still, throughout my primary education, I was exposed to religions and beliefs and found them to be fascinating. But fascinating in a "that's so interesting that people believe those things" kind of way. Not one of judgment, simply a detached fascination. For school, we did some tours of different houses of worship across the city and learned about religions and philosophies as we studied different parts of the world. Throughout childhood and adolescence, I consistently felt held when I was out in the world. Held by a knowledge of something greater, that our lives are small and part of something more. That idea that we are not simply the sum of our parts, but more than that. I remember being struck by a puzzle. In one patch where my grandmother had flowers, she also had a statue, I believe it was of Francis of Assisi. I didn't understand why he was there in that little area of plants, but also because he was a statue, just came to trust his peace there. As I got older and began to realize my trauma and depression, I also began seeking for more. I often say that we are meaning-seeking, meaning-making, storytelling creatures, and this is, for me, a direct expression of my own experiences. I had long been seeking and trying to make meaning of the circumstances of my life and life in general, and as I became an adult, the longing grew. By high school on, I identified as an atheist and still probably would if men like Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens hadn't ruined it so much for us. Their militancy in something that seems to border on loathing, I find deeply upsetting, so much so that I don't want to be associated with it. And having gone to seminary, I now have more words to talk about my beliefs than I did before. I now identify as a non-theist, which mostly means the same things, although non-theist may also include not just those who do not believe in God, but also those who are essentially indifferent to the matter. It's telling that the term non-theist has gained more traction since Dawkins, Hitchens, and others have become so vocal. While some of their ideas do have merit, to me they are really no different in ideology than the conservative and evangelical Christians they so adamantly oppose. In its completeness, I say I am a non-theistic religious naturalist, humanist, and universalist, informed by process theology and collective liberation. That means I feel connected to the world through the world. I try to live a good life and be a good example. I am nurtured in my relationships with other people. I believe that anything that happens to one of us happens to all of us, and that each day, each moment, we have the choice and opportunity to make something different. Unlike others, I have not been exposed to religious trauma or abuse or much of the hypocrisy of church people. And having trained in part in languages and translation long before religion and church became my life, I have a passion for playing with words and using them in a way that expresses what I mean. When you learn a foreign language, it's common to learn word equivalencies. For example, the equivalents of house in French and Russian are maison and dom, respectively. What these equivalencies don't tell you, without cultural understanding, or more specifically, the lived experiences of the people who live in these places, is that while it is common in the US to say that you live in a house, it is uncommon in France or Russia to say that you live in a house. In the case of each of those countries, to say that you live in a house often implies living in a rural setting with very specific geographic, cultural, class, and other content. The word equivalences are not the same as the cultural context. And further, here in the US, house can mean so many things, from a tiny house to a mansion. Those and many other structures can all be referred to as a house. We may have some basic understanding of a 3-bedroom, 2.5-bath, 2-story house like the one that I grew up in, with a yard and a fence. Or we may think of something completely different. The architectural style may vary by home. While we didn't live in one, brick homes are common where I'm from. And there's a style to many of the houses on many of the streets where I grew up that will never not feel like home to me. And so although I am a non-theist, I have ease in claiming what is traditionally thought of as religious language, because the words I use mean something to me. While their basic concept may be represented in my thoughts as they are in others, there may also be a gap in the context of the understanding. I won't have my right to use those words be taken from me. I use words like faith when talking about both individual and collective beliefs and practices. I often refer to Unitarian Universalism as a faith or faith movement because it seems to fit our theology. But I do also at times refer to us as a religion, if the setting merits it, because we are also that. When people ask me what we believe, I tell them that we have come out of the Christian traditions, but are no longer bound by them, and that we are a covenantal faith. Like the differences between an American house and a French or Russian one, we don't believe the way many other religions do. When he was president of the UUA, the Reverend Bill Sinkford expressed concern about how UUs have had much resistance to religious language. He advocated for us to reimagine and claim what he called as a language of reverence. The Reverend Dr. Kendall Gibbons wrote in part in a 2006 piece in UU World titled Human Reverence, the language of reverence in the language is the language of humanity, the following. As a young Unitarian Universalist in the 1960s, I was educated about human sexuality in a relatively open fashion. Human religious experience, in contrast, was a closed book. I discovered my spirituality in much the same way that my peers raised in more conservative faiths discovered their sexuality, accidentally, furtively, without guidance, moved by overwhelming inner tides, and with some sense of shame. I secretly memorized Louisa May Alcott's My Kingdom Prayer, written when she was 13, and sang myself to sleep with For the Beauty of the Earth. To my parents and teachers, almost all of whom had grown up in other religious traditions, the absence of texts, rote prayers, sacraments, holy objects, and moralistic picture books represented freedom. But without any language for my emerging sense of mystery and wonder, I came to feel the contrary, deprived of the tools with which to understand or express those experiences. Many of us have abandoned what we think of as traditional religious language for the reason Reverend Dr. Gibbons states, it represents freedom or religious thought we want to distance ourselves from. So many people now proudly claim that they are spiritual but not religious, including Unitarian Universalists. This always makes me chuckle internally because if you are a Unitarian Universalist and you come to church or participate in congregational life, you are indeed a religious person. In order to practice Unitarian Universalism, perhaps even more so than other religions, you must be religious because there is no practice of our faith without each other. Covenants require more than one person to be made, and so practice of a covenantal faith means that you are with people. And what you practice with people gives you the foundation for a religion. The word worship historically is from the same root as worth. Worship then means not some abstract act done in appeasement, but an expression of respect and value. To worship is to set apart, to honor worth. Religions encourage people to worship what they value. My own insistence on claiming religious language comes from my training in languages and translation, as well as semiotics, the study of signs and symbols and their use or interpretation. It's something we practice all the time without being aware of it or the study of it, like how we know that when we see an octagonal red sign near an intersection, even if it didn't say stop in capital white letters, we likely would stop because that's what the sign implies. And so the word God doesn't mean any particular thing, just as religion or faith or worship doesn't mean a particular thing. Their meanings vary across the different belief systems that hold them. It will mean something somewhat different for Muslims or Jews than it will for Christians or pagans, for the non-theists and humanists among us. A perennial question is whether Buddhism or Taoism are considered religions when they don't fit traditional European definitions of religion. But the words do point to some meaning for us, something often just beyond our ability to express fully in words, like the ground of being. Apart from robbing us from a rich vocabulary that can help us express our meaning-seeking, meaning-making stories, not using religious language has another major consequence. We are harmed directly and indirectly by the way the use of such words has been almost exclusively claimed by conservative and evangelical Christians. Or perhaps haven't even been exclusively claimed, but their voices are so loud we may think of it that way. Our shared faith requires no statements of faith or belief from any of us. We are pluralistic in that people from a variety of faith and belief backgrounds are welcome among us, so long as they covenant with us on our journeys to co-create and participate in community making in our congregations. Our reluctance or unwillingness to use more traditionally religious language has real consequences. It gives more conservative and evangelical, that is, loud voices control over what the use of words means. You don't have to believe in a brimstone, hellfire wielding God. Well, speak up about it, because that's the only God that some people imagine, and a number of them are sitting in our legislatures and judiciary seats. When we can't say, I believe in a God who loves each and every one of us, whole as we are, not in spite of, but because of the ways our humanity is expressed by color and race, gender, sexuality, ability, and other factors, because that's how we can know God, by celebrating what it means to be any and all things. We have given up the control we have to lift words and change their meanings by refusing to take part in the conversation. We also prevent our visibility in public life. I have some colleagues in Georgia and Texas who have shared their practice of wearing clerical collars when they're in public with a pride flag or Black Lives Matter pin or both. They get approached by people of all ages, asking questions, giving thanks to see clergy who support the same things they do openly and unapologetically. It gives them strength and hope. I have myself, with the passage through our legislature now of the so-called Don't Say Gay bill, decided it's time for me to take up this practice. Last spring, I brought myself a pride flag tab for my collar, and I wear that now when I'm running errands. I want the world to know where justice lies, and that at least some of us embrace the inherent worth and dignity of all. And this is a way I am able to do so. And I do it because my theology, my faith is grounded in relationship. Relationship is the core of everything I do. The justice work, the pastoral and spiritual care, the board development, and everything else. My faith is grounded in the belief that everything is interconnected, woven together by care and interdependence in every way. And the trust, faith, that it is always possible that we will do the next right thing, and the possibility that our next choice will be the next better thing. One of the reasons I volunteer with a cat rescue farm and sanctuary is because although I believe in people, sometimes some of us, including myself, grate on my nerves. And when that happens, I turn to the rescue. And I come back to the people both as a source of hope and a source of possibility. I take walks and cross stitch a lot and do the things that feed me to give me the strength to keep moving forward. Sometimes that's resting. Sometimes it's Netflix. Often it's also playing with my cats. Faith requires tending and nurturing in order to continue feeding and sustaining us. Whatever your choices in renewing your faith, your heart, your spirit, may you be heartened in this moment by these words from retired Bishop Stephen Charleston, Episcopal priest and elder of the Choctaw Nation. You are here for a reason that is defined not only by the work you do, but by the life you lead. You are a connecting point to the sacred, a living channel through which streams of grace flow out into the world, into that reality of the people you meet, into the world you help to create simply by your presence. You are a signal, a messenger who lives the message, who embodies the meaning of the holy in every choice you make. You are a healer, a source of nurture and wholeness, here for a reason that restores the bridge of hope. I close my services always with the same words. It didn't start that way, but my congregation has come to love them, and so I offer them to you as well. In The Gift of Faith, Jean Harrison Newyar has written, in the lore of ancient China, there is a story of a philosopher who was asked, where is the road called hope? He replied, it does not exist, but as people move upon it, it comes into being. I invite you to continue moving forward on this ever widening, ever deepening path of Unitarian Universalism with me.